Second, Senator Hawley. Are there any amendments or additions to the minutes? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes stand as provided. We now have a report from President Herbst.
Hi everybody, nice spring day out there. Come on in, late administrator. Everyone else is on time. So just a couple of things, I'm happy to take questions. So the Sackler gift and money, the foundation board president, the board of trustees chair, both agreed that it was fine for us to go contact the Sacklers and ask them if we can take their name off the endowments or repurpose the money take their name off the endowments and repurpose the money or not. So it's a little hard to get in touch with the donor for a variety of reasons, but that's going to happen this week on Wednesday apparently, and we'll see what the response is like. And there may not be a response for a very long time, so we'll give it a month or two and then see where we're at and regroup. So that's that. Land acknowledgement. So Hedley, I don't know if you sent that to the appropriate senators, but I think the proposal came from the faculty, from the University Senate, to have a official land acknowledgement statement that recognizes that UConn, all campuses are built on what is traditional Native American territory. So we have a really nice statement that folks drew up, and we vetted that with all the appropriate people and general counsel. And so now we have obviously it's voluntary piece that you can either read before an event, public, private, whatever, on campus, any kind of event you want. Or you could print it in a program for an event if you want to do that. But we have a nice statement. And so what we'll do is we will, at the beginning of every semester, and maybe once during the semester, just put it on the Daily Digest to remind people about the statement and where they can find it. But I think that the best way for this to catch on is for you to just use it, as appropriate. And then, after a year or two, people will have heard it quite a bit, and they'll probably want to use it too. So, but the text is ready to go. And hey, you get some events here before the end of the academic year. So contact Hedley, and he can get that to you if it's not on all the websites by the time you want to use it. So it's land acknowledgement. Third, so we're spending a lot of time at the legislature these days trying to make our case. So again, I think I mentioned this maybe last meeting, our priorities are pretty simple. It's not to cut our block grant, the block grant to stores and regional campuses, or the block grant to the health center, to protect our capital plan that's in play, because as you probably read, Connecticut has some financial challenges, and they're worried about debt. And we're trying to make sure we can finish up some of the projects that we've started. For example, what we're calling Science One, the big science building, and we have a lot of deferred maintenance and other projects. So we're trying to protect the capital plan. We're also working very closely on fringe. The legislature really sees now what a difficulty that is for us at all levels of the university, the high fringe rate, and a lot of the leading senators and reps want to do something about it. Now, whether they can do something about it is another story, because they still need more money into the general fund if they're going to bring down our fringe rates. The money has to come from somewhere to give us a break. But we are explaining everything to them. I think they really do, Scott, understand the impact now. I think we've, oh yeah, he's like, oh yeah, because we're like a broken record on this, as we have been for years. It's hardly a new argument on our part, but I think finally there's some traction this year. And then, the rest is really above our pay grade, whether anything can happen. Final Four. Okay, so we didn't win the championship. I don't know if you heard, but it was a wonderful weekend. UConn Nation turned out very strong in Tampa. I mean, a lot of people traveled from up here, from around the country, and then we have so many people who live in Florida. You know, people who are snowbirds or who moved there permanently, who are they are hardcore supporters of ours in Florida. When we go down to play University of Central Florida or University of South Florida, I don't know if you ever watch those games on television, but they're pretty empty arenas. But the UConn crowd is really loud, and it's those people who live in Florida who are really committed to us, and they all showed at the Final Four, as did Governor Lamont. And it was his first time at a big event like that for UConn, and he really completely enjoyed himself. He now is, officially considers himself a UConn Husky, so that's good. Last, we have a potentially controversial set of speakers tomorrow. Is tomorrow April 9th? Yes. Yeah. So it's from Turning Point USA. That's a registered student organization, and they're hosting an event. It's a national tour called Campus Clash, and it's some Turning Point USA founder, joined by some speakers who I'm not familiar with. Anyway, the program runs from 7 to 9 in the student union. It's organized by this group, this student organization, Turning Point USA at UConn, which is a subdivision of Turning Point USA. They've been going to many campuses, and it's controversial stuff, coming from, I don't know, Michael Gilbert, what would you call it? Coming from the right, coming from the...
That's correct.
Yeah, coming from the right. Yeah, that's it. And we'll handle this event as we have with other potentially controversial speakers who've been invited by student groups. So we have a lot of planning by student affairs, by the police, university communication, and admissions limited to people in the UConn community. So you have to have a valid UConn ID to get into this event. So I think we're more accustomed to this now, and I think we're ready for it. But happy to answer questions. Ellie Ordina Students is here, Michael Gilbert's here, Vice President, and they could tell you more about it if you want to know, but we may...
Send it along.
Thank you. We don't have sound. We don't have sound. I'm going to wait.
Yeah, we're going to repeat it.
Yeah. No, wait. No.
Yes? Hello? No.
They're bringing you another mic. This is all part of our live broadcast tonight.
Very good. That's working. Thank you, President Herbst. One of the three speakers tomorrow evening is someone named Candace Owens.
Yes.
I'd like to read to you what Zoe Turturino, who's one of our students writing for the Daily Campus newspaper, has written about Candace Owens. And I quote, "Candace Owens, a Stamford, Connecticut native, has frequently made statements normalizing white supremacy and bigotry. In the wake of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, Owens dismissed white supremacy as a myth invented by the media. On her Twitter account, she has pushed anti-immigrant rhetoric, defended ICE detention facilities for children, and supported fascists like Marine Le Pen. What's most revealing about Owens, however, is her connection to the aforementioned Great Replacement theory that inspired the Christchurch, New Zealand shooter. In his manifesto, the Christchurch shooter repeatedly brought up the issue of birth rates and his paranoia that Muslims will replace white people. Owens has repeatedly pushed this conspiracy theory on her social media, claiming that Muslims will be the majority population in Europe by 2050 and institute Sharia law, even going as far as suggesting that France should sic their army on the Muslim population. The first is just bad demography, the second is ethnic cleansing," close quote. Now I'd like to also offer you another quotation. The Christchurch, New Zealand white terrorist mentioned Candace Owens explicitly in his manifesto as an inspiration. Quote, The person that has influenced me above all was Candace Owens. Each time she spoke, I was stunned by her insights, and her own views helped push me further and further into the belief of violence over meekness. So I have two questions. Why are we allowing her here? And what are we doing about protecting students, faculty, and staff from the kinds of violence against people of color that has proliferated alarmingly in the past 2 years?
Thanks. Well, it is our policy to allow free speech on campus, and this is a student group, registered UConn student group, who have invited these speakers. Obviously, we don't approve of it. It's not our invitation, so forth. But they are, by our rules, allowed to come on campus and speak. Now, in terms of getting ready for this event and how it fits with our policies, I'll let either Ellie or Michael address this, whichever one of you like. But
I think providing a space for us to have this event that enables us to keep the campus safe and to provide for the impact this has upon our students is a highly complex problem for the university, and one that accompanies the students who want to bring the speaker to campus. So I would acknowledge the complexity of your question and the complexity of our work in our student organization's desire to bring this forward. So one is the question of safety and security. We have had ample conversations with numerous departments across the university where the students organizing this event have been present, and it will require a significant security effort that will be led by our police and will be very visible tomorrow on campus as we provide for the event. In addition, our procedures have us reach out to other student groups and organizations who are directly impacted by this. So our work is not just in providing for the speaker and the student organization that is running this event, but in also providing for those who protest and disagree with this event. And our support is with those students as well. I know they've been very public about their events that they are hosting at 6 o'clock tomorrow night to express objection, to sympathize with many of the remarks that you've been stating. And certainly our work is to support them as well.
Other questions for the president? Senator Schultz.
May I have just a follow-up?
After Senator Schultz.
All right.
Thank you.
No, I yield my time.
Okay, go ahead.
Professor Long.
With all due respect, my concern is not just tomorrow night. What about the kinds of radicalization that occurs with someone like this on this campus over the next weeks and months?
Well, I would comment first that we share your concern, and student health and safety and other members of this community, health and safety, are at the fore of everything that we do. But our mandate is clear as it relates to the First Amendment. And public institutions such as UConn have a duty to permit this kind of speech with appropriate scrutiny given to matters of safety and concern. And we've done due diligence with reviewing of the speakers and reviewing the logistics related to this event. But I do share your concern because we understand these are very complex issues, and words are powerful and can influence people in many different ways. So again, we share your concern, and we've taken steps to ensure that this is a safer event, as safe as possible.
But faculty can get involved in this, obviously. I mean, you can talk about this event, you can talk about the speech that was enabled here, you can talk about the First Amendment. I mean, we're all in this together, and it's extremely complex, and I think you understand that here at a public institution. And this group and its people have been to all, a lot of the big public flagships like ours already. So we're kind of late on the list, and privates as well. I think the question is, are we getting better at this? I don't think there's any there's any argument at all that we've got better on the safety and what to expect and that sort of thing. So on that, we feel pretty confident, although, we're ready for worst case scenario. But what I'm really proud of the students about is something we've been encouraging for years is for them to not support this event, not go to this event, and have a really great counter event at the same time. So I think they've done this a bit before, but this time it sounds like it really has a lot of traction. Ellie, is that fair? I mean, do you think we're making progress on, the students understand, the gravity of this, the complexity of it, and the way to counter it, which is, to my mind, with more speech?
I think our students have a very comprehensive understanding of how to object in a myriad of ways, and I think you will see that tomorrow. I don't think it's just the protest that's happening. And I am very aware of a very strong position among the students on campus that they don't wish to support this event. And I know that will be expressed in a number of ways, and we're eager to support that.
But I'm impressed too, and the students I talk to at length about this all the time, is they understand why the event is going to happen and why they can't just, crush these folks, not allow them to come to a public institution like ours. And it's very hard, I think, for young people. I mean, you all in this room have thought about this more, have lived through a lot of the incidents, but I see tremendous growth, and we're really challenging them mentally and emotionally in this. And it's, this is getting ready for the real world here.
Senator Schultz, did you have a question?
Yes.
Does this work? Yes. I just wanted a little clarification on your opening comments concerning the Sackler gift. You used the word "or." I may be misremembering, but was it going to be a renaming and a repurposing? Or did the Board of Trustees think that those were...
I guess, maybe I if the Sacklers said, we hear you, you can take our name off of these lectures and these funds and this scholarship and so forth, you can just take our name off, we'd be pleased with that. It's possible that they could come back and say, well, you can repurpose that money toward research on opioid addiction or something. I'm just trying to think of the possibilities. Look, I think the probability of them saying yes to any of this is extremely low. I think we're either going to get a no or just a non-response. So then we're going to have to figure out what to do from there. And, we have options.
Senator Manhunt.
Going back to this event tomorrow, I seem to remember maybe a year or 2 years ago, we had a student event which got out of hand, and one of the factors that was missing was a moderator. So I think if it could be amongst the students themselves to choose a moderator, but somebody that will control the meeting so that it doesn't get out of hand.
Yeah, I wish it were that easy. Do you guys know anything about the format? It's up to this group, just like the content was, so is the format and whether they have a moderator and of what sort. Like you're assuming we have, that it's a university sanctioned event that we control, and it's just not.
Other questions for the president?
But besides, working on these issues, just, day to day as you talk to students and hear them out and help them and support them. If you really want to help, go to the counter event. So when is that? Where is that?
It's 6 o'clock in Castleman.
So at the same time, 6 o'clock in Castleman. And what is that? What's going on at the counter event? Where we can control the moderator and stuff.
This is also a student-run event with a number of student organizations coming together in room 212, I believe, of Castleman. I'm looking to Christine. Thank you, students. And that is open to all. I think there's a great deal of partnership and coordination among student groups, and would certainly add the voices of my student senators to this as well. This has been a lot of their leadership in making sure there is other perspectives being made abundantly clear at the same time.
So that would be incredibly powerful if you on the faculty went to that, if you can all make it.
Thank you very much. We'll now have the report of the Senate Executive Committee. Senator Freak.
Good afternoon, everybody. The Senate Executive Committee has met twice since we last met here. And in addition to those meetings, we've also met with the first two Vice Provost for Health Sciences candidates and submitted responses to the Provost's office. On March 29th, we met privately with President Herbst and then the committee chairs, Senate committee chairs. And at the next meeting, each standing committee chair will present a brief oral report, and the emphasis is on the brief at that Senate meeting. Written annual reports from each committee will be available on the website and distributed with the agenda. Talking of large reports, the Delta GE Task Force is wrapping up their work and has created a comprehensive report, and highlights will be presented at that next meeting, and that also will be distributed with the agenda for that meeting. So I would ask you all to look at that report and come to the next Senate meeting with questions ready. On April 5th, we met privately with Interim Provost Elliott, followed by a meeting with the senior administration. Notable at that meeting, a conversation on profiling and research relative to foreign nationals with Vice President of Research, Radenka Merrick, and Global Affairs, Dan Wiener, led to a focus on that topic at this meeting. So we'll be talking about this later. And then also, Vice President Merrick outlined the process for the NSF audit that is happening currently and is going to occupy a considerable amount of time for that office. The SEC also brought forward concerns about the academic performance of regional campus students who are given residence on the Storrs campus. Vice President for Enrollment Management, Nathan First, reported that that issue is understudied in his office. Last month, we also saw the successful conduct of a meta-oil on youth activism, highlighted by the presentation by David Hogg, as well as talks by Yara Shahidi and Jamel Hill, and more than 20 other events organized by different groups across the university. The SEC wishes to thank the co-chairs, Warwick Athera and Chris Viles, together with members of the organizing committee that are listed on the screens now for all the work they put in. Particularly notable and quite appropriate was the amount of work put in by students with this, with representatives from SUBOG, USG, and Conperg. And without them, this would not have happened. The SEC is pleased to join the Provost's office now in congratulating Professor Manuela Wagner on her appointment as GEOC chair. The 3-year appointment will begin on July 1st, 2019. Outgoing chair Eric Schultz has done a tremendous job leading that committee, and we look forward to Manuela continuing the work. Our next meeting of this body will take place on April 29th. We'll have the annual reports of standing committee chairs. We'll also receive the annual report on financial aid and retention from Nathan First. Thank you. I'd be pleased to address any questions.
Questions for Senator Freak? Thank you. We now have the consent agenda. Does anyone wish to pull any items from the consent agenda for discussion? Having no items pulled, I move for the adoption of the consent agenda. We'll now have a report of the Senate Nominating Committee with Senator Nanclares.
I'm filling in for Pam Bramble, who's the actual chair of the nominating committee. We are presenting the rosters of the membership of the various Senate committees for next year. I believe the information was in the packets that were circulated last week. And this won't be voted now, it will be voted at the next meeting at the end of April. And anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Any questions for Senator Claris? Thank you. We'll now have the report of the Scholastic Standards Committee, Senator Makowski.
You saw this last time, and when we brought this and the bylaws of the Education Abroad Advisory Committee to you last time, Senator Bramble made a number of suggestions involving regional campus representation and rotation of members and things for those EEAC bylaws. And I passed those on to Yuhang Rong in Global Affairs for the EEAC to perhaps suggest back to us that they'd like to modify their bylaws that way. In terms of what you have here, yeah, that's the original. Okay, there's the first change. That was just obviously changing their name. Okay, so there's nothing interesting there. Okay, but you see on this one, we did make one change, a clarification at the suggestion. Remember Senator Manheim had suggested that we clarify that language where it says red can only reject or postpone a course or program for financial liability or safety reasons, that the Vice President for Global Affairs can only do that for those reasons. And so we checked with Global Affairs and the SEC, and they were happy to make that clarification. So thank you, Senator Manheim. And basically, that's it. It's what you saw last time, except for that very small change.
So this is a vote on the bylaws change. This was presented at the last meeting, so we're voting at this meeting. Is there any discussion? Senator Schultz.
Thank you. I got some interesting feedback from constituents this morning when I circulated the bylaws. So if you'll indulge me in some fairly specific questions, and it's possible that these should be directed to the Vice President for Global Affairs. I think that one of the terms that raised some concern was what academically designed programs that will now be under oversight of the Vice President. The question is, would all programs, including leadership organizations, alternative spring breaks, groups of faculty bringing students internationally for research, fall under the aegis of this new rule and regulation? So there's concern that the additional oversight of some faculty-led programs may lead to reduced ability of students to participate and reduced academic freedom to design international programs with individualized financial, admissions, and operational structures. And I've got a specific example here for you. So students have participated in the UN Climate Change Conference in Paris and Poland in the past, and they're scheduled to attend to one this year in Santiago, Chile. To ensure broad participation of academically qualified students, principals leading this group raised funds through the foundation of the college. These funds are not part of the Global Affairs program. Will the change in oversight mean that programs that are not funded through Education Abroad Global Affairs be rejected for financial reasons, or will have to change the process by which students are able to participate, such as now running their support through financial aid?
I'm going to ask Dr. Weiner for his opinion on this too, but my understanding of this bylaw change is that these are for courses which are for academic credit. They are not, kind of group, let's go do something worthy like the UN one you just mentioned, or to control faculty and where they're coming and going. These are just for academic credit type programs. Dr. Weiner?
That is correct. The policy now is that all students of all programs need to go through Global Affairs, so that's not a change, okay? In this particular case, it should be mentioned that Global Affairs has been involved with that program, actually provided some resources for the students to go on that program, so that's actually been a real success story. But there will be no rejection based on funding. That won't happen. That's not a criteria. If there's not enough funding, that's a different question, but if people go out and get funding from different places, we think that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, all those in favor of this bylaw change, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Abstentions? The bylaw change passes.
Okay.
Now Senator Makowski has a proposed bylaw change that we will vote on at the next meeting.
Okay. Last time I was here, a few months back, I brought some possible changes to you, which were not a presentation. I wanted feedback, and the committee wanted feedback about possibly changing the calendar and doing some other things to alleviate the pressure on students in those last few weeks of the semester. So we got a lot of feedback. Yeah, and I was actually there we go. We listened. No calendar changes proposed. No, we did hear that loud and clear, that people did not want the class time reduced, okay? So we're not proposing that. But okay, having taken away that idea of sort of, extending the final exam, the final assessment part, I'm old-fashioned, final assessment period, since we're not doing that, we still have these two problems, that students are overburdened and overwhelmed by the volume of work, including comprehensive final examinations scheduled during the last week of class before the final assessment period. Now, this is a problem because students have no recourse to ask for rescheduling of work. Although the Dean of Students' Office has authority to assist students with excessive workloads, all that bunching and all that, during the final assessment period, the office has no authority during the last week of class to assist students. So that problem remained. And then bunching and conflicts persist among those assessments scheduled by the registrar's office during the final assessment period, adding pressure for students and inconveniencing faculty with a lot of makeup assignments, right? Okay, so we're very grateful to everyone for all your feedback, and we understood that we couldn't extend the assessment period. And we also understood from what people were saying that there was no point in trying to define what a final comprehensive assessment is, one that, say, could not be given during the last week of classes. Because if we said it was 25% of the grade, people would have cited 24%, unlike that. It was too squishy. So we also did not attempt to define what this was. So we're not going to propose calendar changes or the parameters of defined assessments, but here's what we are proposing. Okay, we're going to look at this in 3 different ways. Changing the bylaw wording related to final examinations. This is just, actually, it's always basically said this, just the wording is stronger. Final in-class examinations may not be given during the last week of classes. Okay, and so that's, as I said, it's a stronger wording, but it's always been there. We've never been allowed to give final examinations during class periods. Okay. Create a system whereby every instructor, well, I want to say some more actually about number 1, sorry. This is, as I said, a real problem for students, in that the Scholastic Standards Committee believes that the faculty must be cognizant of and responsive to pressures on students during the last week of classes. We propose that faculty consider the following. This is not a legislation or something. We're just proposing that you think about it in these terms. If your in-class assessment during the last week of classes was multiplied 5 times, which is the typical number of classes a student takes each semester, and then you added going to classes, going to work, and all the other duties during a regular class week, would you consider that a fair workload for the student? If the answer is no, maybe you should be thinking about how you work things during the last few weeks of the semester. And so we're also urging the provost, deans, and department heads to actively assist in reducing these pressures on students during the last week of classes before the final assessments period. So, this is not something we decided that, we could solve by inventing a new bylaw or something, but it really is up to the faculty to be aware of this and thinking about this and what students are going through, especially in that last week of classes. Okay. So the second one, create a system whereby every instructor of every course must register whether or not an assessment for the course needs to be scheduled during the final assessment period. This is just common sense, right? Because if the registrar really knows how many exams slots are needed for final assessments, their office can provide them, and they won't have all these ghost slots where there really is none going on, and they could obviously make a much more rational final examination schedule. And then the third one, the registrar's office will prioritize minimizing bunching and conflicts when creating a schedule for the final assessment period. You might say, well, haven't they been doing that right along? Well, they've been doing the best they can, but they've been working under a system where they were allowing faculty to say, if I had, I don't know what, a Monday 9 o'clock class, that my exam would then be given at Monday on 9 o'clock or something like that. And if you take away those constraints and allow them to move things around, because they have all these systems that can figure out what students are where and that kind of thing, you can actually get rid of a lot of this bunching and stuff just by making a much more rational kind of schedule. So faculty would have to give up that. So in summary, we believe that the problems related to the last week of classes and the final assessment period cannot be alleviated by legislative fiat. The Scholastic Standards Committee has offered 3 considered actions to help address the challenges that prompted the committee's initial proposal, and the implementation of the proposed actions to reduce the end of semester pressures on students will require a cooperative effort by the Provost's office, deans, department heads, but most of all, faculty. Okay, so moving on here. These are the actual changes. As I'm presenting today so that we might have a vote the next time. So this is no vote today, right? Okay, assessments during the semester or term. During the semester or term, assessments shall be held only during regularly scheduled class periods. As you see, that's nothing new. Under exceptional circumstances, instructors seeking permission to hold assessments outside of regularly scheduled class periods must seek approval from the Vice Provost for Academic Affairs prior to the start of registration. Sections of courses for which such exception has been granted shall carry a footnote to that effect in the published schedule of classes and be clearly stated on the syllabus. This is so students will know when they're signing up for classes that this exam or whatever activity is happening outside of the regularly scheduled class will conflict with something else that they might be scheduling. They might want to do it anyway, but they can do it with their eyes open. And so students should be able to know that they would have these kind of conflicts when they sign up for a class. Okay. Classes using the test center for assessments that extend beyond regular class times do not require special permission, provided that the extended exam period includes the window for the scheduled class, and that any student with conflicts can be assured of access to the examination within that window. Decisions regarding possible make-up assessments during the semester due to student absences shall be the prerogative of the instructor. Final in-class examinations may not be given during the last week of classes. Okay. Other types of assessments, for example, but not only, portfolios, performances, projects, presentations, etc., may be due in the last week of classes, but should be clearly delineated on the syllabus from the first week of classes. Okay, the first part there is, again, so that students will not have these conflicts. Should I go to Professor X's class, or but I can't, because I have to take that other exam for Professor Y, that kind of thing. Okay, and then obviously it's faculty prerogative to decide how to make up what a student has missed if they want to, the final assessments, and then, people have said to us, well, what about, why is it terrible to have a portfolio due the last week of classes or a research paper or something? No, as long as the students have known about it from the beginning, that's the kind of assignment that they should be planning ahead and working on throughout the semester. It would only be, in some sense, wrong or something. It was suddenly dumped on them toward the end of the semester. But if it's been on the syllabus from the beginning, there's absolutely no reason why it can't be due during that time. Okay. Assessment during the final assessment period. The format of assessments during finals week remains at the discretion of the instructor, including whether to assign a final assessment or not. And this had been done, I can't remember how many years ago, that you could decide whether or not you'd give one at all. In the event of an instructor chooses not to schedule a final assessment, they must notify the registrar to allow rescheduling of the classroom. And that's that business of, give the registrar real facts. During the final assessment period, instructors may have other types of assessments due, but only if they are clearly delineated on the syllabus from the first week of classes. Instructors are required to administer final course assessments in the places and at the days and times scheduled by the registrar. Those will not necessarily be identical to those at which the class normally meets. Instructors seeking a final assessment period greater than 2 hours must seek approval from their department head and dean or designate prior to the start of registration. Sections of courses for which such exception has been granted shall carry a footnote that specifies the time extension for the final assessments of the published schedule of classes and be clearly stated on the syllabus. For online final assessments, although faculty may choose to make assessments available for an extended period of time, students must be allowed the opportunity to take the assessments during the time scheduled by the university. I think that's all I need to say about that. And then a student, this is pretty much, it's slightly reworded, but it's not real different. A student whose final assessment schedule includes 4 assessments in 2 consecutive calendar days, 3 assessments in 1 calendar day, or 3 assessments in consecutive time blocks spanning parts of 2 consecutive days may request a note of permission from the Dean of Students' Office to reschedule 1 exam. The Dean of Students' Office will determine which of the bunched assessments may be rescheduled. The student must present the Dean of Students' Office note of permission to reschedule the final assessment to the instructor of the course. A student who is prevented by extenuating circumstances from completing a scheduled final assessment must apply to the Dean of Students' Office for validation that will authorize the student's instructor to give a substitute assessment. A student whose absence is excused by the Dean of Students' Office or designee shall have an opportunity to complete a substitute assessment without penalty. A student who is absent from a scheduled final assessment is not excused by the Dean of Students' Office may receive a failure for this assessment. You notice it's may, it's up to the discretion of the instructor. And that's it.
Questions? Senator Majumdar.
You are proposing changing the language that prohibits scheduling in-class final exams during the last week of classes.
Not really. The language is a little stronger.
Stronger,
but it's
yeah.
always said that.
It has always said that,
Well, in
and
recent memory anyway. Yeah.
and anecdotally, it is violated as frequently as it is obeyed. Now, you are acknowledging that we cannot enforce that by legislative fiat, so I am not sure what the stronger language, what purpose it will serve.
I don't know that we'll absolutely solve anything. What we're trying to do is raise awareness of this problem among you, so all of you, so you will spread this awareness to your various constituencies, and also that the deans, department heads, and the provost's office will keep these ideas before the faculty, because I think that's who we have to sell. I mean, as you said, there has been a policy, but if people don't follow it, it doesn't help. Yeah.
Well, I mean, maybe it may sound a little radical, but with many policies in the university, if faculty violates that, there are consequences.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not proposing any radical consequence here, but would you consider that if a student reads in his or her syllabus that Professor X in course Y is giving a final exam on the last day of class, will that student be able to report that anonymously to a central office which can then intervene, requiring the faculty member to back off from that plan?
Usually what a student would do, now this is not in the legislation, but usually what a student would do would be report that to the department head. And under some kind of confidentiality. But that's actually how it should go, because the department head may not necessarily be aware of some of the faculty activities which would be contrary to the bylaws.
Senator Tumu.
That's a really good point, and I agree with that. But I want to add that there are other social pressures that students are subjected to when the professor announces a final examination that is not during the final examination period. For example, if the final examination is scheduled on the Saturday of finals week, people will often take that alternative option given to have the final exam be on the last week of class, so they don't have to stay or make their peers stay until Saturday. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I would like for the members of this body to be aware of and share awareness of the fact that these pressures exist. And so when you ask your students, hey, would you rather have a final exam the Thursday before finals week? They may answer yes, and you may not have anyone that says that doesn't work for them, but it may not work for them. They may just be saying yes because they would like for their classmates to go home earlier, or because they may have another final examination on a day adjacent to work. There are other concerns that play into that. Additionally, students are not aware of who the department head is or that they should talk to a department head. So the grievance procedures surrounding this are really vague and ill-defined. And even if they are well-defined somewhere, they're not publicized. The students don't know that they exist, which brings us back to the original point. I think the stronger language, while practically serves very little purpose, I think it'll at least raise the issue to the forefront of people's minds, hopefully, hopefully compliance will get a little better. I'll yield.
So are you suggesting then that maybe, I mean, not to change what we've done for today, but that perhaps the SSC in the fall should look into ways of students could let their concerns be known about a faculty action and a syllabi in publicizing that? Okay.
Senator Graff.
Thank you for the update. And my question is regarding laboratory sections. So they don't have a special, so my class, for example, has a lecture in the lab portion, and so I schedule my lecture final during the finals week, but then for the lab portion, it's in the last week of classes, the lab final. So how would that be affected by this policy?
It wouldn't be. That has never been under the legislation, either the bylaws now or in the past.
Senator Manheim.
I have some comments on section 1, but I also wanted to know, is the bunching of finals in any way being affected by the existence of a reading day? And I'm not even sure whether we still have a reading day, but if we do have it, doesn't that get everything squeezed before the reading day and after it? Or how does it work?
I would defer to someone from the registrar's office if we have anyone.
We have one in the fall, but not the spring.
Yeah, not the spring, it's just the weekend. So, I mean, okay, so maybe that should be looked into at some point. I mean, not this very minute, but okay, reading day in fall.
Now, if I can get to point 1, you said that holding assessments during the semester, not final assessments,
yeah,
can only be held outside of regularly scheduled classes under exceptional circumstances. Well, a lot of us are faced with the reality that the class time is just too short for an exam, and you'd be giving up a class time if you had the exam during it. Therefore, we have exams outside of class time. And I don't regard that as exceptional. I think that's a reality, especially in the sciences. But nonetheless, I think the word exception might be a little bit too harsh, but otherwise I understand the concept. Now, I agree entirely with the notion that if a course wishes to hold assessments outside of its regular class time, that has to be indicated to the student at the beginning of the semester. In fact, you're even indicating when they register, which is fine. And then you want it to be stated on the syllabus. But that's not enough. You need on the syllabus to state when the assessments are going to occur, not that they are going to occur outside of class time. You actually need to know when are they going to be. And students need to know that right at the beginning of the semester, so that if they find in other courses that they're also using assessment outside of class time, that they'll know when the conflicts occur. So I think that those points can be emphasized. The other issue is you have identified bunching rules for the final assessment week, but there are also bunching problems with assessments during the semester. And there are logical steps to have maybe one midterm at, say, at the end of the 7th week, or maybe an exam at the end of the 5th week, an exam at the end of the 10th week. And in the sciences, especially where I am, this is a very common practice. And I'm finding, of course, that I'm teaching, I'm finding that students, if they are having evening non-class time assessments, they're all coming in the same week, because we're all using the same 14-week schedule. So I think there need to be some bunching rules even for those assessments as well.
Okay, so I'm going to take back to the SSC to think about that word exceptional, and then to clarify the business about when exactly this outside of class assessment would be put on the syllabus. And then this would not be for this round of legislation, but perhaps for next semester to think about what's going on around midterms and the bunching there. Okay.
Senator Payne.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate the comment made by the student about the awkward position when faculty say, well, I had a conversation with the class and everybody was cool with it. They loved the idea. There is no way for a student to go, but I have to work on that Saturday and I want to screw up everybody's time. There's no forum for that student to talk freely. And what they do is they go to the faculty member who didn't ask for the extra time if they have a conflict and ask for them to reschedule and putting it on the other faculty member. That conversation never happens in my experience in scheduling final exams. The second thing is that we used to have a calendar date for makeup. And it was a Saturday, and it was listed in the calendar. If anybody wants alternative time outside of the class period and outside of the final examination period, we usually have a Saturday set aside for makeup.
It's still there.
Okay, so we should be advertising that as if you have an outside exam time, it should be during that time, because that's what's advertised. And so I commend the efforts to make public the options that faculty have. So there's the makeup Saturday, and there's also setting up, letting the registrar's office know.
Okay.
Senator Turney.
So I'm actually going to address Senator Manheim's objection, because I actually strongly want to emphasize the exceptional nature of testing outside of class. I teach an evening class for a large lecture, and I'm constantly being thwarted by science classes and exams that take place concurrently with my class time and my quizzes. And all of a sudden the student is placed in the situation where they have to choose between my quiz and the other quiz. And everyone else manages to organize their semester course offerings in the time that they're allotted in class. I don't see why science gets a special dispensation from having to organize their class time to include exams in the class period that they're allotted. So exceptional seems like a good thing to me. My second point has to do with special needs testing. So also because I teach a large class after hours, the Office of Student Disabilities is never open, so I pay out of pocket to proctor those exams because there's no other way to do it. Just saying.
Yeah, we do not have any jurisdiction over CSD because of all the legal issues there.
Senator Schultz.
Thank you. I thank Senator Manheim for drawing attention to that difficult passage. And I gently suggest to the English professor that there's something a little strange about the syntax of that sentence. It seems to suggest that under non-exceptional circumstances, instructors don't actually need to seek approval.
Oh, I see what you're
That's
saying.
contradicting
Okay.
the previous sentence, so
Got it.
little wordsmithing might be helpful there.
Okay, that would be a clarification one. We won't need to do it all over again. Okay, thank you.
Senator Howell.
Can I talk loud?
No, because of the broadcast.
So in support of my colleague, as a science professor who for the majority of my career, and I've been here since 1994, gave exams in the evening, when it became strict, when the university became stricter about it, I did find a way to make and I teach organic chemistry, which is something that a lot of students dread. I did find a way to make my exams be 50 minutes. So I don't think it's required that science exams be an exception.
Again, I wouldn't claim to speak for anyone in the sciences. Obviously, I'm an English professor, but this is the kind of matter where I would think that the science faculty would wish to think about this and, get ideas from each other about, is this really the only way? Do we really need to go outside of class time to do this? Again, I don't know your subject matter and your particular courses, but this is something maybe you would want to think about.
Other questions or comments? Okay, Senator Claris.
I'm not sure it's a question, but following up on the issue of the assessments during the last week of classes, so I have known professors who don't put the issue to a vote, and the class has to decide whether they take the exam on the last week of classes or during the assessment period. But I have some professors who give the option for students to take the exam either last week of classes or during finals week. And I guess, I mean, is that fine? Is that not fine?
So long as students would have the option to take it during the time the registrar has scheduled, I don't think there would be any problem with that.
But it says you can't right now.
Okay, yeah. Final in-class examinations may not be given, yeah, during the last week of classes.
I'm not advocating for it. I just would like clarification because I know people are going to disagree with that.
Senator Segerson.
Thank you. I guess the question I have is if you have a class, an exam that's being given outside of class period, I do that precisely because I want to help the students by giving them more time. Often you think an exam will be something that's doable within a given period of time, and then there are students who want more time, and so that's easier if it's given outside of class. But I would always tell them that if they have a conflict with that, then I will make arrangements for them to be able to do it at another time. So it seems to me that the critical thing is that when a student has a conflict as a result of that, that the faculty need to accommodate that.
Yeah, I would think that that would be critical, and as I said, the students would also know about this conflict from the very beginning.
Senator Bakun.
To the comment about the option to take a final or not, I think if I understand the wording the way we hammered it out, nothing has really changed in that you can't give in-class finals during the last week of classes, so that option wouldn't exist. What I think may exist is the option to take the final or not during finals week. So I think that's and I don't know if that's what your faculty are doing or not, but in some classes the final is optional if you want it or not. That I think is allowed under the language. I think having an option to take the final in the class period during last week of classes is currently not allowed and isn't allowed by the new language.
Senator Berkowitz.
Thank you. Actually, continuing on what Senator Buckham just said, I believe that if all students, without exception, vote to take the final at a time other than during the designated time, that I believe currently that's allowed.
Actually, it never has been.
If all students in the class.
There's nothing in the bylaws about that, even the previous bylaws.
Okay, well, I'm wondering, I'm posing that perhaps this body might consider that.
I think that if we get into too much detail, we're going to be like, writing everything in such minute fashion that we're going to be in this horrible snarl and tangle. And these are the kinds of decisions which I think, obviously if you're going outside of your class time, extending the time, you need to give students notice according to this bylaw, working out with your department heads and your deans, these other kinds of questions. I don't think we should legislate everything to that teeny bit.
And one minor comment to add on. The Center for Students with Disabilities, I have found always is very open to working with a faculty member, and they schedule exams at different times working with the professor. So I found them to be very, 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 very helpful.
And they do have a very good system, but again, it's not something that these bylaws are in charge of.
Senator Bresciano.
Yeah, so voting, I think that's exactly what our senator over here was just describing as one of the major problems, because unless you're doing it as a secret ballot, there are some students that are going to feel as though they're pressured to say yes because they don't want to be the one jerk that makes everybody stay until Saturday. But with that said, I think in practice, what's been quite common is which is not written here, so you may want to think about it, as long as the exam can be given during the time that is scheduled by the university, like I don't care if the faculty want to give them another opportunity that's more convenient for the student and the faculty member. Like, why would anybody protest that? As long as the original time is available to that student.
Yeah, I think that's the key
position,
point.
Which is the same thing that we've been doing dealing with online courses, you know, when they have it open for 24 hours. As long as that includes the period that the registrar's office set, then we're good to go.
Yeah, I agree with that comment because, you know, again, getting back to our original point, we're trying to take the pressure off students in that last week of classes. And if some wish to take it, then so long as there is an option for other students to take it on during the final assessment period, I don't think that, you know, we need to be fussing about that.
Senator Berkey.
Thanks very much. I'm just curious, in all this discussion, spent a lot of pages trying to come up with a lot of different scenarios that impact students. Have we considered, or did the committee consider, what peer-to-peer aspirant universities are doing to deal with this? Because presumably we're not the only large public that's dealing with this kind of issue. So I'm wondering if, rather than reinventing the wheel, if we can look at what some of our peers and peer aspirants are doing in this space.
Well, kind of yes and no. We didn't look at so much, well actually we did look at a little bit for that business about the last week of classes, but not too much, because what happened was we have at UConn, and other people should correct me if I'm wrong about this, fairly student-friendly policies like the one you saw a minute ago about bunching, like if you have 2 on this day or 3 on, you know, that sort of thing. That a lot of other universities will just say, too bad, you've got 2 exams in a row, okay. I mean, so, you know, since our exam policy in that sense doesn't match other people's, it's kind of, you know, yoking those together didn't work very well.
Other questions? Senator Freak.
I just wanted to offer 2 clarifications. The first is that if you look at the old bylaws, the language in there is simply that in-class final examinations must be given in the places and at the times scheduled by the university. That language is retained, but to it is added, you cannot do it in the last week of classes. It's just to make the language even clearer. So that part has not changed, we just added to it. The second is to recognize that what we're looking at here is bylaws. Bylaws have to be interpreted then by policies and procedures, and that's where we have to make sure that the bylaws are now followed, and that is a function for department heads and so on.
Thank you.
Other comments? Thank you.
I'll take all this under advisement and I'll be back at the next meeting. Thank you.
We'll now have the report on research with Vice President Williams. Sorry, Associate Vice President Williams.
So we were originally scheduled to present our annual report on research, and we made the decision to do a last-minute change. And this last-minute change was really a result of Radenka meeting with the Senate Exec Committee on Friday. And some issues and concerns were raised regarding foreign collaborations, especially foreign collaborations associated with sponsored research, especially sponsored research that is federally funded. But we felt it might be a better use of our time today to sort of talk about what some of those issues are, be able to address any concerns or questions the faculty may have in terms of the implications here at UConn, also to give you a sense of what it is that we are doing to address some of these concerns. So the university has continued and will continue to encourage faculty to engage in international collaborations. We not only encourage faculty to engage in international collaborations, we work really hard to provide the kind of support to facilitate those collaborations. It's it's not hyperbole to say that some of the most impactful scientific discoveries have been a result of these kinds of collaborations. So we want to see them happen, we want to see them continue. What has occurred more recently, however, is that making note of these collaborations really should be done with a certain degree of transparency. It's simply that faculty need to disclose that those collaborations are taking place. And the reason those disclosures are required, especially at the federal level, is that it provides the university, as well as the sponsor, the funding agency, to be able to assess what's the nature of those collaborations, so that we can assess whether or not there are any potential conflicts, whether those conflicts are financial, whether those conflicts are in terms of commitment of time or commitment of effort. It's also important to evaluate those collaborations to ensure that we don't see a duplication of research, and whether or not grant funding is being used to support research that's also dually funded in some other mechanism or some other way. And the primary reason that duplication is important is that the funding agencies want to be able to assess whether or not they should adjust the funding award to take into account all of the other sources of support that may be provided for a particular research project or research initiative. And then more recently, we have seen some additional concerns raised around diversion of intellectual property. This expectation of disclosure is not new. It has been in place for a number of years. Most people who have been getting federally funded grants are aware that you're supposed to disclose if you have other support or if there are foreign components to your research. So that's always been in place, and most federal agencies have similar kinds of requirements around disclosure. What we have seen, though, more recently is that there have been growing concerns raised at the federal level regarding non-disclosure, and that is efforts to not disclose intentionally what those foreign collaborations may be if there's a foreign component. There's also been concerns raised regarding sort of nation states having systemic efforts to either influence or divert federally funded research. So those issues have been raised more recently around whether or not we are seeing non-disclosures occur at a more kind of deliberate, intentional level. And some of this, some of you may be aware, starting around last summer, around 2018, a number of notices started to come out from different federal agencies raising concerns around potential non-disclosure around foreign collaborations. Back in August, Francis Collins, the director of NIH, sent a memo to 10,000 institutions here in the US, cautioning those institutions to make sure that their faculty, their investigators, are in fact being compliant and making these kinds of disclosures and concerns that have been raised by non-disclosure. That was followed by the National Science Board, also reiterating the importance of disclosure. And then in December of 2013, NIH asked its advisory committee to sort of do an internal review. And in that internal review, NIH identified that there were 3 areas of concern: non-disclosure around financial conflicts, non-disclosure around commitment, and peer review violations. The non-disclosure around financial conflict was really around, they identified a small number of scientists that they felt had engaged in some serious violations. They identified about a dozen or so, maybe a little bit more, but a dozen of these violations were then reported to the Office of Inspector General. And the undisclosed financial conflicts were concerns that NIH-funded grants were also, in terms of the foreign component, that there was foreign research dollars that were supporting those same grants. That in fact, NIH was duplicating funding. They were providing funding for projects that were already completed or already being funded by a foreign entity. The undisclosed conflicts of commitment were raised because a number of these violations also included scientists, investigators, who basically had dual appointments at a foreign institution, and in fact may have shadow labs at foreign institutions. And then the peer review violations were, what was identified was violations in terms of confidentiality of the NIH peer review process, where grant applications were being shared by collaborators at foreign institutions, and that priority scores were being altered so that certain applications would have a higher likelihood of funding. Right? They identified those as part of their internal review. Now, once we move to more Department of Defense, we've gotten more prescriptive language from the Department of Defense. In August, the National Defense Authorization Act was signed, and there was specific language in that act to caution institutions, actually placing responsibility on institutions to make sure that they limit undue influence from foreign entities that may be trying to exploit research technology, research intellectual property of Department of Defense funded research. They are charging the Department of Defense to put in place explicit policies that will either limit or prohibit funding where there is known deliberate intentions to divert intellectual property or to engage in either fraud or non-disclosure. And then the Department of Energy, earlier this year, 2019, specifically targeted foreign talent programs. The one that's the most likely, the most often cited are the talent programs originating in China, the various 1,000 Talents programs. They've issued the most restrictive language, and that individuals who are part of one of these talent programs may be prohibited from either having funding from the Department of Energy or being a contractor hired by the Department of Energy. Now, the vast majority of these international collaborations and federally funded collaborations are in fact, they're compliant, they don't have any issues, they are engaged in high quality research. It is really a very small percentage. As I mentioned, NIH, when they did their internal review, they identified sort of a small number of what they identified as kind of serious violations. 96% of these collaborations are not going to have any issues. The problem is going to be that small percentage where we see some of these more kind of serious violations. And to just give you a sense of some of these in the last decade or so, if you can see these, the 2006 case was specifically around kind of export control violations. And this was one of the first instances where an academic was actually charged and convicted and had a 4-year prison term for having foreign exchange students, graduate students, working in his research lab and working on what was considered to be restricted research. And in 2010, and this is an ongoing case with the FBI, an investigation was launched regarding an exchange student working at Duke University. And there, the accusations there are specific to stealing of intellectual property. In 2014, we saw 3 research scientists at NYU who were arrested and charged with grant fraud as well as conspiracy. And then the most recent incident occurred in 2019, actually February of this year, where a Virginia Tech professor was found guilty of grant fraud for duplicating his grant applications, getting grant money from NSF and the Department of Energy for research projects that had already been completed and funded by a foreign entity. So what are we expecting from our faculty here at UConn? As I mentioned, these policies have always been, not always been in place, but have been in place for a number of years. And it's simply that faculty are expected to simply disclose if they have a foreign component to their federally funded research. And you can disclose that foreign component at various points, but primarily it can be done so at the proposal stage. Faculty, when they're submitting their grants, are asked to disclose, is there any other funding or resource that you should report? Or it can be done after the fact if there's any questions through sponsored programs. The key here is that if there's a foreign component, it's not that it's prohibited or there are any issues. Once it's disclosed, it needs to be approved before the work can begin. And all of those things I described before have to take place. Assessing whether or not there's overlap, duplication, if there's any conflicts, have to be assessed. The NIH defines foreign components as any significant scientific element or segment of a project outside of the United States, either by the grant recipient or by the research collaborator. And that would mean even if grant funds, even if NIH grant funds aren't going to support the international collaborator, if the international collaborator is conducting research related to that grant or supporting that grant. Historically, we have always define that foreign component as the work is taking place outside of the U.S. It is not clear if that definition is going to stay restricted to the work is actually taking place outside of the U.S. We know that NIH is going to release some additional guidelines regarding what defines foreign component. We expect to have those guidelines issued in April, so this definition may change. But this is the definition that's been in place for the last at least 8 to 10 years. And other sponsors typically have similar kinds of requirements in terms of what defines a foreign component. It's also expected that faculty need to disclose any significant financial interest. This is a practice that's also been in place for a number of years. And that financial interest isn't just, are you getting other grant support? This is going to be any type of significant financial interest, including consulting fees, if there's other salary support, honoraria, or if you have stock options or other kinds of investments that may potentially create a conflict of interest in the grant-funded research. And we have, as a university committee, a financial conflict of interest committee that their primary responsibility is to evaluate those potential conflicts. So what has happened at UConn? So a few months back, probably somewhere around 1 or 2 months after Director Collins issued that August letter, a number of institutions were sent notices from NIH identifying researchers at those respective institutions that may not have disclosed foreign components to their research. UConn was one of those institutions. And one of the ways that NIH identified that there may be potential non-disclosure was to look at the publications of NIH-funded faculty, or NIH-funded investigators. And were there publications that indicated NIH support, as well as support from a foreign entity, as well as potential affiliations at both US as well as foreign institutions. They simply asked institutions, would you evaluate if in fact there should have been some type of disclosure for these individuals. In addition to NIH notifying us, we have had faculty, because they've also been aware of the concerns that have been raised, contact us directly and ask, I'm not sure if this is a foreign component, I'm not sure if I should have disclosed, or I think I should have disclosed and I didn't realize this is something I was supposed to do. So they've contacted us directly. And our response is the same in all of those instances, is that our role is to do the appropriate assessment. So we have worked with each of those identified faculty to do that kind of assessment. Is there in fact a foreign component to the research? Should it have been disclosed? And if the answer to that is yes, then we work to make any type of corrective actions. The corrective actions can include a range of actions. It will depend in part on what the assessment finds. It is almost always the case that if we deem that a disclosure should have occurred, we will make that disclosure to the appropriate funding agency. We may also require that there are corrections made to any reports that have been previously submitted where that disclosure should have been made. We may require corrections to any publications if any of those publications were inaccurate in what was reported in terms of funding or affiliations. We may require additional training if we feel as though the faculty member should have been aware of these policies and practices. We'll do some additional retraining. And we may then make referrals to other appropriate committees that should have been informed of those disclosures, including the financial conflict of interest or faculty consulting. And if necessary, we'll make adjustments to the awards, and we usually rely on the funding sponsor to indicate whether or not there should be award adjustments. Under some circumstances, we may in fact, if there's determinations around the non-disclosure that merit so, we may terminate the actual funded award, or we may potentially prohibit the faculty member from seeking future funding. That is a very rare occurrence. As you can understand, that's not something that we would do simply because it's kind of a flippant decision. There's a reason why it's very rarely done. Every effort is usually made to mitigate and address the concerns, and there are very rare circumstances where we would either terminate the funding award or prevent the individual from seeking future funding. And the reason that we have to take this position is that federal dollars, all funding, sponsored funding is awarded to the institution and not to the individual PI. You know, the individual faculty member is the one that is submitting and seeking and doing the work. The institution is ultimately awarded those grant dollars. And the institution is also ultimately responsible for those grant dollars. And we're ultimately responsible for ensuring that compliance has taken place and that we can, in fact, engage in the research that we've allowed the faculty member to submit. And so if there are violations of non-compliance, especially violations that are seen as either the institution is not engaged in appropriate training or internal controls, the institution will ultimately bear the responsibility either of returning grant dollars or having other kind of fines assessed. So it is important as the institution we ensure that the faculty are being compliant. And if there are any questions or concerns, or any of your faculty or colleagues have any questions or concerns, they're unsure whether or not they should have disclosed, they are more than welcome. What we do is encourage them to contact the office, the OVPR. They can pretty much contact any Associate Vice President for Research, but our two directors of sponsored programs, Laura Cosma and Paul Hudabenko at the Health Center campus, are certainly going to be a good point of contact to address any kind of concerns. We have existing mechanisms in place if people are getting ready to submit awards. They should just follow the stated policies of practice. But if there's any questions about any new awards going out, whether or not there's a foreign component, the faculty members simply need to contact sponsored programs, and we'll address those concerns.
Before I ask for any questions, it's past 5:15. Does anyone have any business they plan to bring before the Senate? Okay, great. Any questions? Senator Mannheim.
It's only a small question. Suppose someone here with a grant goes to an international conference outside the United States, which is partially funded by the host.
If you are, so right now, if you have a federally funded grant, you have to disclose if you're getting that additional support if it reaches the threshold in terms of consulting, because that would fall into the consulting practice. But if you are invited to engage in a talk or a conference and you go and it falls below that threshold, there shouldn't be any issues there. That's not where this sort of falls.
Senator Gibson.
Yeah, I guess I'm just a little confused. Aren't most of these things a problem even if the component is a domestic one? Like conflict of interest, disclosure of financial, all that seems to be a problem even if it's a domestic component to the research. So why is foreign being emphasized here?
So the answer is yes, all of those things, conflict of commitment, and the issue here is that there's growing concern that there's been more of a systemic effort to undermine U.S. research programs and academic institutions, and to have faculty or investigators not disclose when there are foreign collaborations. So that's where the concerns have been raised, is that this, at the federal level, the observation, the concerns, or the efforts have been to evaluate whether or not we are seeing certain nation states engage in these more kind of systemic efforts.
Other questions? Thank you. Oh, sorry.
I just wanted to know the numbers for
Senator Kendall.
Thank you. For UConn, in the last 2 years, say, is this affected 1 individual, 5 individuals, 10 individuals? Can you make an estimate?
I want to be sort of careful because I don't want to violate any, in terms of confidentiality, and sometimes it can be easy to sort of figure out who folks are because people sort of heard things, or so I just want to be sort of careful there. I'll just simply say that not many. So far, there have not been many. You know, like I said, UConn is one of a number of institutions that have been notified. Interestingly enough, a lot of institutions are very hesitant to sort of report whether or not they are one of those institutions that have been identified. But the numbers have not been, we're not talking large numbers of individuals, just a small handful that we are aware of. What we have been seeing is more faculty reaching out to us and asking, because they're sort of reading what's in the Chronicle and the news, and they're hearing about experiences of colleagues, and so they're reaching out to us to sort of ask and clarify.
Other questions? Okay, Senator McCoon.
My question is there any indication that this may down the road start to impact opportunities for international graduate students at our institution?
So one of the things that we're waiting to get guidance from NIH is in that area. So as I said, the foreign component historically, and when we look at the definition literally, has really pertained to research taking place outside of the US. There is concern by NIH that it is through some of these exchange programs where the research may be taking place in the US, there are concerns that those relationships are not being fully disclosed. Not that they are prohibited, but they may start to require that those relationships are disclosed, so that if you have international collaborators working with you in the US or in your labs, including students, we may see that that will then become one of the things that you have to disclose. But right now, that is not the case.
It's very difficult to distinguish fact from fiction in the current political environment, but I think what I can tell you, and a lot of you probably already realize, is that there are people in the administration that have floated ideas like eliminating visas for Chinese students. That's extreme. It'd be very unlikely that would happen, but there are some really extreme things out there. Might a piece of that happen? It wouldn't surprise me. I'm not saying it will happen, but we need to be prepared at every level of this institution for what could possibly go wrong with our relationships with Chinese universities and Chinese students. And it could be other countries as well, but at this point, I think that's the major issue given who we are. Again, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but good leadership means you need to be prepared for those things.
Just to give you an example of that, and some of you may have heard that at NIH in Bethesda about 2 weeks ago or a week or so ago, 2 Iranian graduate students were removed from the facility. One was there for a job interview, the other was there as part of a research program, and the police removed them because they did not have their appropriate citizenship documentation. This is a policy that has been in place at NIH for a number of years, but the practice had not been to have that kind of explicit documentation presented. Francis Collins this morning, I believe, or it may have been over the weekend, issued a formal apology personally to those individual students as well as more broadly, because that was not the way that should have been handled, and that's not the way in which NIH wants to move forward. So that's just kind of a real life example of what Dan just reported, that we are likely to see missteps, but hopefully sound minds will correct them.
Senator Kendall.
Just a comment. Thank you very much, because I do think that talking about this very complicated issue and exchanging our thoughts about it is really important. And thank you again for using your time for the annual report in this way. Thanks.
Other comments? Thank you. We'll now have the report of the We'll now have the report of the Vice President of Student Affairs, Vice President Gilbert.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to
have this opportunity to provide you with a brief background on the Division of Student Affairs, with some information about the broad purpose of our work, and highlight for you much of the work that we've been doing over the last 3 years and will continue to do with our focus on a strategic plan in the division. So I have the pleasure of working closely with 4 associate and assistant vice presidents, several of whom are known to you because they are active and engaged members of this body. And our work together as partners is to bring guidance and direction and support to what is a fairly large and complex organization. In total, we have 16 different offices and departments that comprise the Division of Student Affairs. And these departments are as large and complex as residential life and student health services, and as focused and narrowly purposed as the One Card ID office. But these are the specific departments that comprise the Division of Student Affairs. We are thoughtful and intentional in our work for the campus community and in service of the students at the university. And our work focuses to bolster and support the educational mission of the university. And we endeavor to support learning on both sides of the classroom door, because we think that powerful and important learning does occur on our side of the classroom door, much as it does on the faculty side and academic affairs of the classroom door. And our purpose is to provide programs and experiences and services that support student development so that our students become successful citizens while they're at the university and ultimately effective leaders. Our strategic plan, which was adopted in the fall of 2016, embodies these 5 core values or themes and give direction to the work and investments that we make as a Division of Student Affairs. And I think it'll surprise none of you to know that we are deeply committed to and very focused on the health and well-being of all UConn students. I can't think of a more important value or theme that we should apply ourselves to supporting. But we also are very committed to supporting our students so that they become more effective citizens and they learn from their time at the university and become able to navigate in what is becoming a more diverse and complicated world all the time. We also understand that our students who become more engaged in this campus community as students and as citizens actually enjoy greater success while at the university. And there's research that suggests that students who are engaged in educationally purposeful activities at the university advance to degree completion more quickly and in greater numbers. And we know that we hold a special responsibility to creating the kind of campus community that invites engagement and helps students invest their time in healthy and purposeful activities. And of course, finally, I'll mention that you would expect, and we also expect ourselves to be good stewards of our limited resources as a university. And we are concentrating our efforts to ensure that our goals and priorities align with the vision and priorities of the university, and also so to ensure that we're investing our limited resources of time and talent and financial resources into becoming a more effective organization all the time. So I wanted to share with you some of the ways in which we've invested our resources and some of the accomplishments that we've enjoyed over the time that we've implemented this strategic plan. So I'll boast a little bit, but I'll also highlight some areas where our work will have to always continue, because I don't think in many ways we ultimately satisfy the needs of our students by making some select gains in many of these areas. So over the last few years, we're very pleased to have been able to grow the impact and the staff resource in our Dean of Students office. And we've added over the last 4 years 3 additional full-time equivalent positions. I'll highlight for you that each of these positions were repurposed and rededicated from other parts of the Division of Student Affairs. In fact, 2 of these 3 positions came from the Vice President for Students Affairs office, my own office, because I believed they were a more valuable resource to place more closely to our students in the Dean of Students office. And one important aspect of these 3 new staff positions is that one of the positions specifically supports work that we do related to Title IX and serves as an advocate and a support person for students who experience violence, and especially sexual violence. So We have a staff that's well-versed and well-trained. All of them are well-trained to support students, but we have one specialist who gives special time and attention to that very important requirement. We've also, over the last few years, created a new resource at the university that is having a huge impact in support of our students' health and well-being and their success at the university. And we refer to this team as the student care team that responds to, engages students who present as being in crisis. And oftentimes these students are in the care of a therapist at the university, but they have an experience that requires intervention and support and attention of a different type. Oftentimes these students are in crisis, but their conduct does not require or necessitate us referring them to community standards. They need immediate attention and support from the university. And so we have a team that's comprised from staff from our counseling and mental health services staff, from residential life, from Dean of Students Office, and public safety that come together and routinely do case review and determine what the intervention will be to support students who present in crisis at the university. And at sometimes during the school year, in fact, for most of the school year, we have as many as 300 to 400 students who are being supported by this team. And we're very pleased to report that most of these students do well, they right themselves and find more equilibrium and do well at the university because of the care that's being provided to them by trained, appropriate professionals. We've been able to increase counseling and mental health services staff by 6 full-time equivalents over the last 5 years. We've also, separate from that, been able to hire a team of per diem therapists who are local to the university who come in and give us hours every week. And that's a very financially prudent way for us to gain greater capacity in counseling because we pay them an hourly wage versus covering their fringe benefits and other costs. But we're able to bolster that resource for our students. And our students will tell you this is never quite enough. And that's a conversation for some other time. But we've been able to grow this valuable resource significantly over the last few years. And we're very proud of that work. And I have to look at my colleagues in academic affairs and specifically the provost office to say how grateful we are for the partnership we had with that set of colleagues over the last few years to introduce additional staffing related to counseling service needs at the regional campuses. And we today now have 4 full-time counseling professionals at the regional campuses that 2 years ago we did not have. And we've adopted a new counseling model on each of those campuses, and we employ a case manager that is available to do intervention when it's needed with students who are in crisis, to do immediate intake and to determine what their condition is and ultimately refer them to community resources where that's the next order of business that our students would require. So this is such a valuable resource. We'll be adding a second FTE at the Stanford campus in the coming year because of enrollment growth there and because of demands that's being placed on that office already. The same goes, I'll look at our colleagues again in the provost office to say how grateful we are and how much we want to credit them for their great leadership in acquiring additional resources and then working with us so that we could add 3 additional FTEs in the Center for Students with Disabilities. And we now have a full-time professional staff member that's been assigned to our Hartford campus and to our Stanford campus and finally the Waterbury campus. And we now dispatch and share a staff position that's based in stores to work with our Avery Point colleagues. And so we've been able to grow that valuable resource, again, through partnership with the Provost Office over the last couple of years. We've also developed over the last handful of years a 3-part series of educational programming that is required for all students related to sexual assault prevention and education. So when students come to the university for summer orientation before arriving for their freshman year, there is an aspect of the orientation program that involves students in a conversation and discussion about what consent standard is adopted and employed by the university. And we do a workshop with those students about sexual assault prevention and awareness. And we know from the student evaluations and from parent comments that this is seen as a valuable, more essential all the time learning experience. We also have partnered with Senator Ouimet and our colleagues in the Women's Center to introduce the VOP, Peer Education Violence Against Women Training Program, as part of the FYE experience. And David and his team have done outstanding work with our colleagues in the Women's Center to actually apply that as a part of the curriculum in the first year experience program. And to his credit, David was able to do that in a very nimble and effective way on very short notice several years ago. So we're grateful for his leadership and efforts in that area. And lastly, we've introduced what I refer to as a booster shot on this topic for students who are rising juniors. And we now require students before registering for their junior year fall classes to go online and take a new module that has been very well received by our students called Not Anymore. It's about a 52-minute on average online workshop that again reminds students of our expectations and our resources on this valuable and important issue, and requires them to take a pre and post test to demonstrate competence and understanding around the topic. You can imagine the delight when we introduced this workshop, and it has come to be very well received and very well evaluated by students. Another area that we continue to focus on, and you won't see many data points where we just document transactions, but there are a few of those, and I apologize for those because I think there's much more and other more important measures of our success and our work than that, but there are some ways and times when just transactions really do matter, and that is tell part of the picture. So, I could have selected any of the last 5 years to use it as an example, but in the past academic year, the Division of Student Affairs alone offered approximately 250 different workshops that were related to conversations and discussions on various topics related to diversity, inclusivity, and how that relates to our campus and our expectations and our aspirations for our students. These programs are generally well attended and very well received by our students, and many are done in partnership with student leadership groups and organizations. And this is a point of pride because we want students to know how important this issue is at the university and how we value it, and we want to invite them to engage in thought and conversation about these important issues. And let's face it, this is not an easy, accessible topic for our students to wade into right as they join the university. So this is a constant area of effort and application of our time. We've introduced a new keynote diversity lecture as part of our featured programming during Week of Welcome when the students move back onto campus, and this was introduced by Christine Wilson, Senator Wilson and her staff a couple of years ago, and it is an area that we will continue to grow and implement in years ahead. And we're also working with a group of student leaders on a new online workshop that will be a conversation with students currently enrolled at UConn and their experience with and their aspirations for becoming a more diverse and a more inclusive community, and what that requires of all students. And so we are working with a firm to develop that videotape now. We're working closely with the Office for Diversity and Inclusion to hand off that product when it is completed, and that will happen in the next month. And then they will work to introduce it to incoming students sometime during their freshman year. I mentioned earlier that there's 40 to 50 years of research now suggesting to professionals in student affairs that there is powerful learning that can occur if students become engaged in the community on both sides of the classroom door, and if they apply themselves to focusing on educationally purposeful activities, healthy activities, and things that promote growth and development. And certainly we're committed to that work and those priorities. So I'll share with you one of the areas that we have been working on, and this is a challenge that we spent a little bit of time talking about today, but the issues of free expression and expression rights on college campuses is an above-the-fold issue. I certainly keep an eye on those discussions, and we spent a little bit of time on that today. My understanding of the First Amendment is its inception was based upon the need that was seen to protect unpopular and offensive speech in particular. And certainly that's what we're talking about with the event that's scheduled for tomorrow night. And so we have worked in partnership with students and student organizations and our police force and others at the university to ensure that when there is the possibility of a difficult talk or controversial speakers coming to campus, that we bring the right members of the community together to sort out what that will involve and how we can work together to ensure as safe a program as possible. And that is an ongoing process and priority. One of the things that pleases me about our process is we require our student organizations to be part of the discussion. And we ask that the advisor for that student group also attend and take responsibility for hosting that event, because we think we need all hands on deck to ensure for the safety and well-being of all of our students. Some other areas to highlight for you is, I can't tell you how enjoyable and exciting it was in my first year here to work on the project team that designed and discussed the program that we wanted to accomplish in the Worth Residential Tower. And I think David Ouimet and I spent every Wednesday together, along with other members of the team, to work through what our aspirations were and how to deliver a facility that would provide the kind of atmosphere and environment that our students and faculty deserve and need. We've designed the most intelligent, creative building that we could have when you consider how many residents we place there. You know, it's almost counter purposes to build a community with almost 700 people. Like, how do you build community with that kind of mass? But we've done that, and I think to the credit of our colleagues in academic affairs and in construction and planning, we've delivered a terrific building and a terrific program for all of our students. We also have developed a bystander intervention and training program that we provide as part of this new student orientation program the summer before they arrive on campus. And we now have a new and improved part 2 that we provide to student clubs and organizations later in the academic year. And now we have delivered this thousands of times since its inception, and it again is a very well received program. It stuns me, it surprises me, and concerns me that we have to talk to our students about caring for their classmates and making responsible decisions for themselves. But we do, and so we work hard to engage students in conversations where they think about that issue and they take some form of responsibility and commitment to protecting the well-being and providing for the safety of their classmates. We have one of the greatest community outreach and community service programs that I've ever seen in higher ed, and I've now studied at and worked at 10 different universities. And I always compliment Christine Wilson and her team on the work that the community outreach office intends to accomplish and the way they do it. Because I think it's also, while it's a service program, it also doubles as a great student leadership development program, because many of these service projects are actually developed and supervised by our students, and then they're executed by our students, and we coach them up and we support them and we give them guidance and advice, but they have to work through the development of these programs and their delivery. So here are just some transactional figures that I'll share with you. Our programs touch about 4,500 students yearly. We have 54 year-long programs that run throughout the year, and we offer 16 alternative spring break programs. And the net result of that is over 100,000 service hours that we deliver to the broader community every year by way of our student commitment and support. We have similar numbers for our discrete student leadership development programs. We offer an extensive array of student leadership development programs every year, and we have over 4,000 students annually who participate in those programs. I mentioned also, along with our diversity program, in the past academic year, we offered more than 150 sexual assault prevention and training programs to our staff and to our students and our student leaders. And that work continues. Those numbers are constant from the year before and will continue this year. And I have to tell you, I'm just delighted to be so close to opening the new Student Recreation Center, because I think this will be a very important center of gravity to help us build more community and support well-being and health and safety for our students. It will be a great, in many ways, it will be a great addition along with the student union that will in many ways be a living room for our students, where our students go and meet friends and pursue healthy activities. So I love the idea of a Thursday night packed with students at the rec center. You know, there's nothing that could please me more when you think about where they could be and what they could be occupying their time. And then just a few highlights about organizational effectiveness. I mentioned that the work of the assistant vice presidents and myself is to give guidance and leadership and direction and support to our directors who oversee our 16 offices and departments. I can tell you these initiatives and accomplishments are hard-won, and they're really important to the university and to our division. I can tell you that we really are committed to being an organization that presents best practice, that represents good stewardship for limited resources, and we want to make sure that we choose to spend our time and our resources in ways that align with the university's goals, missions, and our own strategic plans priorities. So here are a few ways in which we pursue that. The faculty in the room may be interested to hear that we've borrowed from some of your best practices, and we actually have implemented an external review process. And we actually do, similar to academic program reviews, we select departments to do a internal self-study review, and then we select colleagues from around the country to come in and do an external peer review to take a look at our programs and our departments and our effectiveness and how we organize and conduct business. And to date, we've completed over a half dozen of such reviews, and those reviews have actually bolstered our work and have given us guidance, and in some ways, they have prompted us to focus on new roles and responsibilities and to reorganize our thinking about some of our work. And you can see from that first bulleted highlighted, we've done this work with President's Life, with Fraternity and Sorority Life. The Center for Students with Disabilities is just wrapping up their activity. We've done this with the Dean of Students Office. And again, it helps us learn about our field away from our own campus, confirm some of our observations or learn new things, and pursue best practice where we're not already on that path. We've reorganized our student health services practice. We now refer urgent care, in most cases, away from the infirmary and actually to UConn Health. We've done that in a way to support the work that's being done on the other side of 195. And also it allows us to right-size our organization and for them to fill capacity that they have available. We know the staff there well, administrative and medical staff, and we know the quality of care is commensurate to our own and high quality, so we have some agreements in working with them of what we will refer to them. We do primary care still mostly out of the infirmary on our own campus, but we do much urgent care work by referral to them. And as would be the case on the Stores campus, insurers are billed for the care that's provided. That's not a change in practice, it's a continuing practice. This has allowed us to actually lessen our hours of operation. We are no longer open until 10 in the evening, most work days. We were running extended hours that are unusual, even for a large residential campus like Stores. And so we've cut back on evening hours and weekend hours, but not on the quality of our service and programs. We now do testing through a different third-party private vendor. We don't do our medical tests in the same way we did previously in the infirmary, and so we've streamlined services and the work we've done. And then over the last 3 years, it's a shame that Scott Jordan's not here, but I'll make sure he sees this slide. But over the last 3 years, we have pared our operating budget as a division by a little over $4 million. And we've done this in part due to request, but also out of self-determination. So we have pared the residential life program budget by $1 million, and that's a continuing cut that was adopted 3 years ago and has continued these past 2 years and will continue next year. We've pared the dining services budget over that same time period by about $2 million. We've frozen, in the past year we have frozen, we elected to freeze, and we've frozen 8 full-time positions in the Division of Student Affairs, and that has resulted in a total savings of payroll and fringe benefits of over $1 million. And we've made that routine 3% cut to our other ledger as required of most of us, if not all of us, every year. But the division's funding primarily comes from auxiliary services or through student fees, not from tuition or block grant allocation. It's a very small, I think it's about $6 million of our $200 million revenue and operating budget that actually comes from the block grant or from tuition. And so the great majority comes from auxiliary services and fees. But we have still taken our cuts and pursued larger cuts because we believe there's a better way to accomplish our work and to protect quality. And then lastly, I always make fun of people when they point in the wrong direction. So Cheryl, will you give me one more slide? So lastly, we have just completed a comprehensive review done with a private consultant that studied the quality of our dining services program as students see it, not just as we see it, and also looked at the financials. And the question financially was, what would be the better business arrangement for UConn? Is it to continue as a self-operated, university-based dining services program, or financially would it make more sense to pursue a contract with a Sodexo or another private vendor? And I can tell you I was pleased with the results, as were other members of the administration of dining services, because it confirmed some important aspects of quality. The first few things that it highlighted in the study was that there is outstanding talent that has been secured in the leadership team of dining services, and a private vendor would not necessarily improve the quality of leadership. And so there is talent available, and we've been successful in securing talent to run and execute our dining program. The second, and perhaps even more important point, is that our dining services program by students is seen as high quality and healthy in most cases. And we're able to offer some special dietary features that other private vendors kind of eschew because they are not economical and they're not positive for the bottom line. But we actually offer a number of special dining options that are health related or are based on personal identity and observation preferences. The other programmatic contribution that was really emphasized is that dining services is one of the leaders on campus as it relates to the environment, being green, and sustainability efforts. There's a strong commitment to that, and dining services is seen as a champion and as a good collaborator on those important issues related to sustainability. And then the financial bottom line shouldn't be missed. And what the study confirmed was about 26% of the revenue budget that dining services receives in one way or another reverts back to the central budget of the university. So through our auxiliary tax or our overhead charge and through a number of other mechanisms, dining services is a substantial financial contributor to the bottom line of the university. We return roughly 25 to 26% of the revenue budget. And then the firm that we worked with on this review confirmed that contracted food service operations routinely return between 15 and 20%. So it would be less revenue for the university, lower and less control of product and quality, and less discretion on what dining services pivots to support would be gained by converting from a university-based dining services program to a contracted provider. And so this is an important question for us because members of the trustees for years asked this question, and others have asked this, and as finances have grown tighter, we have to take seriously these kinds of evaluations. And this recent review demonstrated the value of our dining services program. So we have a couple of other slides. So little of my work is tangible in the way that when you get done a good day, you step back and you go, that's what I have to show for it, right? So I know many of you, if not all of you, can relate to this. You know, so you paint a wall at home and you go, look at that wall. I painted it, it looks nice. So we have the Worth Tower. That looks nice, it functions well. The Recreation Center is spectacular and will be really welcoming of students of all types and with all different interests. And so we're happy to let you know that we intend to have the official opening on the Monday. Now, again, this is preliminary, but we're hoping that it'll be on the Monday that the school year begins the day before classes. And we'll probably have some soft opening days before that, so faculty and staff can tour the facility well in advance sometime in August. Then one last slide. Yeah, so one area that I just wanted to highlight is how much of a pleasure it's been for my colleagues and for me to work closely with our colleagues and get to know other leaders on the regional campuses. And this is an area that has been a long-standing area of interest and commitment in the division. But the difference now is there's just more growth that compels a deeper investment and relationship between our staff centrally in the Dean of Students Office and in residential life, in the Center for Students with Disabilities, and counseling with colleagues and with students at the regional campuses. I just wanted to highlight for you that it was a daunting undertaking, and it continues to be challenging to work with just the residential life question alone at the regional campus at Stanford. That's why I get pale every time anybody from one of the other regional campuses says, you know what we need is housing, right? All the blood and color goes out of my face. So anyway, so this is a brief set of highlights, and I know the time is late, so just wanted to say it's a pleasure to have this opportunity. Thank you, Heather, and to the members of the executive committee.
Questions? Senator Mann.
I hope you won't take this as any kind of a criticism, but the statement that you return 26% of dining services to the university, on the face of it, means that you're overcharging the students. And I would like to know if you could clarify that. But there is another side to the story, and that is that the funding of the dorms themselves is done by revenue bonds, and part of the cost of the student living in the dorms is to finance the revenue bonds. So is it possible that the 26% is being used for that purpose?
My understanding is that there are some revenue bonds for several of the residential communities, but the majority of them were actually not revenue bonded. They were built by state funding, as was the case of Worth Tower. Worth Tower is not bonded. It actually was funded by the state of Connecticut. But there are some bonds that we pay annual debt service on. And there certainly are some dining facilities that are in a similar position. So when the university and the budget office proposes the fee to the trustees, and the trustees are approved, all of the expenditures within the residential life and dining services budget are detailed. And it's for everything from electrical costs. You know, the largest charge to the residential life budget, for example, is the charge for facilities care, custodial service, facilities care, routine maintenance, and that's about a $35 million charge to the residential life. And there's similar charges made to dining services, but of different amounts.
Other questions? Senator Madden?
So the 26% is just overhead?
I beg your pardon?
The 26% is just overhead?
Not all. Not all. But yes, most of it.
Others? Can I have a motion to adjourn? Senator Fang, second. Senator McManus. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.